Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 17th season of CityWide. All year, we're talking about the big issues impacting the lives of New Yorkers. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Richard Steier, editor of the Chief Leader, New York civil service newspaper. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ken.
What does it say about the city of New York and its government that the bureaucracy is so large that it has its own newspaper to cover it?
Well, it had its own newspaper even when the bureaucracy wasn't so large. Chief goes back to 1897, although back then it was geared entirely to firefighters, which is the reason for the original name, and gradually expanded first to police and then to the rest of the municipal civil service. So
what do you cover? If most of our viewers may not be familiar with the paper. I've read it over the years. If I pick up the Chief, what am I going to see?
Well, the Chief has always been aimed at both people who work for the city and to a lesser degree the state and federal governments, and also to people who are looking for jobs in city government or outside of it. It also covers beyond that what I would sometimes refer to as our version of French pastry, which means the labor issues that the unions deal with, the impact that a mayoral decision is going to have on government workers' lives, the more serious stuff that is not nuts and bolts civil service.
So has Mike Bloomberg been a good mayor for New York City's unions?
I would say that you have to break that up into his first and second terms as opposed to the current one. In the first two terms, he was inclined to do business with the unions, in part because he was forced to. He discovered that a bargaining pattern on an early contract with DC 37 was not going to be honored in an arbitration for the police union, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. And once that happened, he became fearful of the police union being able to argue that their members ought to be paid more like Nassau County cops. And so that he wound up agreeing to contracts with the Sergeants Union and a couple of others that he hoped would limit what the PBA could get if it went to arbitration. And so that when people talk about Bloomberg's first and second round of contracts, they would say, if anything, that he was generous to the unions. That was also...
And even more so as he approached his re-election campaign in 2009.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the only union that he willingly gave good money early on was the United Federation of Teachers, and that was symbolic of the fact that he was making education his big priority. Gradually, relations began to sour with the UFT, and either they soured with the other unions or he simply began to show more of his inner Bloomberg during his third term and was not inclined to do business with any of the unions. And so that you have a situation in which the UFT contract expired more than 3 years ago for police and firefighters at this point. They're about 2.5 years working under an expired contract, and the same is true for most of the other city unions.
Right, 14 unions or perhaps more, also the TWU with the NTA. What is, I can't think of a precedent in my professional career going back to the 70s where there were these many workers working without a contract for as long as it's been. This is unprecedented, isn't it?
It is unprecedented. It's something that the unions grew more casual about negotiating contracts beginning in the 1980s, that once upon a time the expiration date really was a big event, particularly for the TWU. There were always rumblings about strikes if a deal wasn't made, and in a lot of cases they weren't genuine threats, that a deal was already in hand and whoever was mayor and Mike Quill just liked to play out the drama a little bit and then announce something at the witching hour. But the unions ultimately decided that in some cases there wasn't anything sacred about getting a contract right on time, in part because of a section of the Taylor law known as the Triborough Amendment, which means that if a contract expires, that its terms stay in effect until a new contract is reached, and so that they felt that a lot of their benefits were protected by that it wasn't absolutely necessary to settle at that point if either the city was saying that it didn't have the money to give them what they wanted, or if they thought that by waiting they could get more advantageous terms.
But look, let's take a step back and look at where we are. For the workers, does this mean that they haven't had raises in 2, 3, 4 years?
Yes, yes.
But personnel costs keep going up. Why is that?
Well, the big hit comes from both pension costs and health benefit costs, because those are things that the city has to deal with each year that a worker accumulates. They're increasing their pension or becoming eligible to collect the pension. Health benefit costs have been increasing the same way that they have all over the country for people in the private sector as well as the public sector.
We also have something, I think they're called step pay plans for a lot of the unions. Your entry salary might be $30,000. By 5 years later, you're at $40,000 without technically having received the raise. Does that add to the cost of the employment costs?
Yes, it does. I mean, this is true for the UFT. Pretty much it's constant. For police and firefighters, it's something where you reach maximum salary after 5.5 years. In the meantime, you're progressing each year. You're getting an increase to the next step on the scale until you hit maximum, in addition to any collective bargaining increase that's negotiated.
Theoretically, I guess that's because as you get experience, you're better at the job, and then at some point you've reached the level as everybody else.
That's part of the theory behind it. It once upon a time was a 3-step plan where they reached maximum after 3 years, and Mayor Koch managed to stretch it out because he felt that it was a way for the city to save money on the new hires and reward people who were veterans, which the PBA liked because the veterans were in a position to keep on voting them into office.
So let's take the other side of the equation. Let's sort of look at it from the taxpayer's point of view. All of the unions have either said directly or indirectly they're just not interested in negotiating with Mike Bloomberg. Bloomberg has not taken advantage of provisions in the law that would allow him to force arbitrations, force the bargaining to come to an end and go through a third party to figure out what the right increases, if any, should be. Next mayor is going to be facing this gigantic hole in sort of operational management, but from a financial point of view, are the unions expecting that they're going to get retroactive increases? And has Bloomberg put aside any money for that?
If he's put it aside, it's very insubstantial. The unions are expecting retroactivity, and part of the problem that he's confronted by is that it's not something where you've got a clean slate, that there were contracts that he agreed to, most notably with District Council 37, which represents most civilian employees for the city, and also Teamsters Local 237, which represents everybody from housing authority workers to prison cooks. And those 4% increases are being sought by unions with the UFT at the front of the line, and the argument they make is that for at least part of the period in which those raises were granted, they have open contracts and they expect to get the same thing. And the mayor has said that the city can't afford to give them the same thing, but he's gone from a position where once upon a time he was insisting that it was essential to honor city bargaining patterns to suddenly saying, no, we can't afford to honor those patterns, that we're not going to give them the same thing that we gave to some other unions, and any raises that are negotiated eventually are not going to be retroactive.
But he's not going to be here to carry that out. So you have the unions on the one hand saying, we haven't gotten a raise in 2, 3, 4 years. We want some money to make our members whole, and we want to move forward because that's what unions expect. So are we looking at potential wage increases that outstrip not only the city budget, but are ahead of sort of inflation? Could we be looking at the labor costs of the city going up 5, 7, 10% over the next couple of years?
It's conceivable, yes. Yeah. It becomes a question of what happens, whether they go into arbitration. And the unions, at a certain point, even though the members are anxious, even though the members feel stretched by not having had a raise for so long, just made a calculation that they're not going to negotiate something on Bloomberg's austere terms, that they would rather wait and see who the next mayor is and deal with that person in what they would consider a more normal bargaining environment.
So the mayor is now saying, as recently as his State of the City address, that the candidates for mayor, at least the Democratic candidates for mayor, are basically shills for the union. They're going to give away the store. Is that a fair characterization?
No, it's not. This is simply Bloomberg being Bloomberg, of trying to bully the other candidates into falling into line and saying we're going to be just as tough as he's been. And the argument that you could make is that A, he's being unreasonable, B, he's creating this huge potential retroactive payout that somebody is going to inherit. And he's a guy who is noted for his good fiscal management, but this would not be something that he would be remembered fondly for. It would place him more like a John Lindsay, who left all of these ticking time bombs that accumulated and helped cause the city fiscal crisis.
Well, that's exactly the point, is he's almost setting up the next mayor, whoever it is, for failure. That the next mayor is going to be facing costs that they can't contain and no money to pay for it, and basically, you know, if they are unsuccessful mayors, the way Beam was after Lindsay, it'll just make Bloomberg look better.
That's the way he'd like to believe it'll happen. And if you were counting on tabloid coverage of the next mayor, then it could happen. But my guess is that an awful lot of people are going to realize this is an unusual situation, and this is a problem that's being created by him taking an unrealistic stance at the bargaining table.
So how come the Democratic candidates haven't pushed back on this? The only one I think who's even mentioned it in the speech has been Thompson, saying it was irresponsible for to let it get this far.
I think that John Liu has made a point of it as well. I think in the case of both Christine Quinn and Bill Thompson, they don't want to be declared to be shills for the unions at this early point. I think that they would simply like to go about running, and if they win, then they'll deal with what they have to deal with.
What about Andrew Cuomo? He doesn't seem to be as confrontational with the unions, but he hasn't taken any guff from the state unions either.
Well, you could argue that Andrew has been a lot tougher on those unions than Bloomberg has, because he's forced a 3-year wage freeze along with furloughs of employees and a substantial increase in their health care costs. So you might call it a velvet fist. He has not ratcheted up the rhetoric the way that Bloomberg has, but he has been tougher on them because he's been able to have a practical impact by threatening layoffs. That in New York City, partly because Bloomberg has run it pretty well financially, there isn't the specter of layoffs hanging over most of the unions, and so that him threatening would not have much impact.
One situation where the specter of layoffs is indirectly being raised is on the school bus contracts and strike, and we're going to talk about that when CityWide continues right after this.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college.
No, I didn't quit my job.
I'm finishing my degree with the CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life.
Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY.
And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
Welcome back to CityWide, speaking with newspaper editor Richard Steier. We are, as we speak, in the middle of a school bus strike that has affected 100,000 children and their families. It occurred because the school bus system is actually a private system, and the bus drivers are concerned that the mayor is in the process of rebidding the contracts without job guarantees. So if a new company emerges on the scene and wins a route, the drivers for the company who have that route today are not necessarily guaranteed jobs, and if they do get jobs, they're not guaranteed seniority or the same salaries or benefits. At the same time, the mayor is saying that we can save perhaps $100 million a year or more by bringing in new companies, and that the job protections aren't really necessary for the safety of the children. It's a mess. The strike's been going on for weeks. Tens of thousands of families have had their lives disrupted. How did we get into this mess? Is there a way out of it? Is this something that can be compromised?
Well, it's something that is potentially a compromise situation, except that the mayor has refused to deal with that. That what happened, and he used as his justification for taking the position that they wouldn't include this employee protection provision. You had a court ruling 2 years ago that basically said that it was improper as it was written. And the problem with it was that if a new bidder was looking to come in and put in a bid, they couldn't make a realistic bid or an informed bid because of the fact that the people who already had the contracts had no incentive to provide them with their true employee costs. And so either they might decide that for all they knew it was too expensive to get involved, or that they would wind up in a situation in which they would be putting in too big a number, not realizing that the costs weren't quite as steep as they thought. The obvious solution to satisfy the court would be that you put in a provision under which the people who already have the contracts have to offer to the new bidders a true employee cost, and that way they could go in with their eyes open. And
doesn't the city have a right to that information anyway? Pretty much every city contract with an outside vendor gives them the right to check the payroll records of the vendors.
According to the court, they were giving them an aggregate number, but it wasn't accounting for things like how much experience various drivers had, so that you would have a real sense as to what your workforce was on that particular route or group of routes.
So Bloomberg is basically, I think, and the Chancellor, Dennis Walcott, said, look, it's the right thing to do. There's no compromise on this. There's no compromise of the safety of the children, which I think is everybody's paramount interest, but this is an either or, and they have so far basically just said it is worth it to inconvenience the students and the families, disrupt their lives for weeks, perhaps longer, in order to make this policy stick. And it's not there doesn't seem to be the same kind of pushback, daily coverage. It's kind of mentioned in the tabloids from time to time, but there's no rallying of anybody in support of Bloomberg. There's no rallying in support of the unions, except from some of the politicians. The rest of the city of New York seems to be ignoring the whole thing.
That's accurate. The union has had a daily presence outside of the Tweed Courthouse, where the Department of Education is headquartered. I think that they've also been protesting outside some of the garages as well. But to a large degree, Bloomberg has been able to command the stage and has been able to set the agenda simply because of the bully pulpit that he enjoys as mayor.
And the rest of organized labor hasn't, they may have expressed support for the strike or sympathy, but it's not as if you're seeing hundreds of thousands of other civil servants rallying to their side.
They've had a couple of rallies, both of which were held on Sundays, where you're not going to get a whole lot of media coverage, and you're probably not going to be able to turn out members to a large degree. I think that there's some belief that it's not going to be won in the streets holding demonstrations, but because of that, the public is not being constantly made aware of what's going on and what's at stake.
Let me take a step back also, and I'm intrigued by some of the rhetoric from some of the elected officials who were supporting the union, many of whom have called on the mayor to negotiate, stood in solidarity at the rallies, et cetera, with the unions. Many of these elected officials have also, in other forums, called for the city to cut back on outsourcing, on contracting out of services, pointing to scandals with consultants, saying the costs are too high, profit motive, et cetera. Am I correct? I don't believe that anyone has proposed that bus service for school kids be done by public employees. I don't believe that anybody has said that if the city basically took over this operation, or DOE took over the operation, or contracted it out to the transit authority for that matter, that strikes would be prohibited, as they are for all public employees, the profit motive would be reduced, and they could then work out something to protect the existing workforce, or if they're going to be replaced, it would now be pursuant to a civil service system. So if the elected officials are against contracting out, why aren't they calling for school bus service not to be contracted out?
That's an interesting question. The only individual who I've heard raise that during the conflict has been Larry Hanley, who's the president of the Amalgamated Transit Union, which is the parent union for Local 1181, the group that's currently on strike. There is some logic to saying, why should this be done by private companies, that you have potential inefficiencies, you have the profit motive, that shouldn't this be done by the city in the same way that the state, through the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, provides transit service, both in terms of buses, subways, and commuter rails.
And would make it strikes, if not completely impossible, at least it would make the strikes illegal.
Yes, yeah.
So this is not the only labor confrontation that's going on in New York now, at least between government and its unions. The teachers union and DOE is also at loggerheads over evaluations. And there's a lot of talk from both sides as to who was responsible for a tentative agreement blowing up, the consequence of which is that the city has lost $250 million of state aid, the risk of losing more, having the state impose their own system. Who's at fault? Is it everybody? Is it going to get worked out? How do we get into this kind of a situation?
Well, in terms of who's at fault, I don't think that there's too much question at this point that it was the mayor who blew up what appeared to be a tentative deal, that you don't have to take the union at its word for it. You just look at a column that Bob McManus did in the Post in which he said as much, and McManus was angry at the union. He was not looking to take their side, but he said that one of the people on Bloomberg's side who did not believe that much in standardized testing had decided to reduce the factor that that would play in evaluating teachers, and that when the deal was taken back to Bloomberg, he blew up. So, I mean, to me, that pretty much tells you all you need to know in terms of who scuttled things. In terms of the objection that the mayor had about the 2-year sunset that was supposed to be part of the deal, most of the state jurisdictions have reached 1-year agreements, and the mayor said that doing something like that is a fraud. It's pretending that you're accomplishing something when you're not.
Well, maybe he's right.
But the implication then is that either Andrew Cuomo is a dupe in signing off on all those things, which I don't think anybody would say, or that Cuomo was just doing this as political window dressing when in fact you didn't have anything meaningful. That it would seem like it's not unreasonable, particularly when you're talking about a 2-year period, that you take the time and you see what's going right and what is a problem in terms of that agreement, and see about fine-tuning it at the end. I mean, this is something that has always happened in terms of certain types of state legislation where it comes up for renewal, and more often than not continues to be renewed, except when it doesn't, as in the case of Tier 2 for cops and firefighters, the better pension system that Governor Patterson finally decided not to sign a 2-year extender on a few years ago.
There's no anti-union fervor in New York. There are these fights, and there's who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. But it's certainly a far cry from what's happened in Wisconsin, Michigan, where there have been social and political movements out to break the unions. New York is still a much higher percentage union town than other cities, largely because of the municipal unions. Is that because despite these periodic battles, relations are actually pretty good? The working relationship benefits everybody, or is there something else at play?
I think part of it is New York is much bluer. I mean, Wisconsin has been known for progressive politics, but it's also produced Joe McCarthy and people like McCarthy over the years. And so it's a little more schizophrenic than New York is. Here, there is a basic sympathy that people start out with for labor until they see abuses. And in this situation, partly because the mayor seems overbearing so often in dealings with ordinary New Yorkers, people tend to assume that in a battle like this, that chances are if he's been unreasonable in things that directly affected their lives, maybe he's the bad guy in this conflict as well.
And they're standing up for him. Who is the most powerful labor leader in New York?
At this point, I would be inclined to say Mike Mulgrew, simply because of the role that the United Federation of Teachers has had in not only setting the agenda for city government, but also in terms of its clout in political races outside of the city, especially in Albany.
Tell me a little bit about your background. You're not just a labor reporter or a labor editor. You've been covering New York for a very long time. What's your trajectory been like?
Well, I was somebody who wanted to be a sports writer and couldn't get anybody to hire me as a sports writer. And when I first came to the chief, I figured I'd stay a year and move on to a bigger paper, and then discovered it wasn't quite as easy to move on, and that I liked the work at the chief more than I had expected that I would. There was a point where I spent 4 years working at the Post, where I was doing a labor column for 3 of those, but I was also working out of City Hall and covering city government and areas that you don't do when you're working primarily for a civil service audience.
Do you belong to a union?
The Chief is actually a non-union, privately published newspaper. It's one of those little idiosyncrasies. There are a lot of people who always assume that either we were part of city government or that we were owned by one of the larger unions, but it's not the case. It's been owned by the same family for the past 94 years now.
It's an interesting slice of the New York City microcosm of politics. Does the chief endorse candidates?
We endorse for mayor and for president. We have not endorsed for governor, and I guess as much as anything, that's just been my individual decision, that it was something where once upon a time the chief endorsed for mayor always, but president was a more recent phenomenon going back to, I guess, 2000.
Well, I would anticipate that after our show airs and people realize that your endorsement is still in play, you're going to be getting some interesting phone calls in the next couple of weeks. My thanks to Richard Steier, editor of The Chief Leader, New York's civil service newspaper. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at cuny.tv.